Good, bad, right, wrong, chaos, law. Where do you fall on the spectrum of alignments? Do you have an alignment? Do you sort yourself into an alignment house like a Gryffindor or a Ravenclaw? Is your alignment determined simply because you're born a certain way or to a certain species? Welcome to Tabletop Totality. I'm Cody, and I'm here with my friends.
Steven?
Neil and Frank.
So we're talking alignment was a big issue in older editions of Dungeons and Dragons. Certainly with like classes like the Paladin, where if you strayed from your lawful alignment, you could, lose all of your powers and get chewed out by your deity, things like that. Alignment now isn't so much a big deal in fifth edition, and to me, even just from a story aspect, from either writing a story or watching a movie or reading a book, I don't like characters that are all like completely defined with like rigid lines. Like I don't like characters that are just they're all in on one thought or um if they have no variation to them, because I just don't buy it. I just don't think it's real. I
Yeah.
think enough people like our world especially is hard enough that will have good people who sometimes have to make bad decisions or have to make bad moves in order to survive, or even there's bad people who occasionally do something good. How many stories do you hear about, soldiers on opposite sides fighting and then like finding each other on the battlefield and helping each other or becoming friends afterwards?
Yeah.
So I don't think everything is so cut and dry. So to like when I play a character, like for me to say, oh well, what are they generally, or like what do they have to like? What's the mold I have to put them into? I kind of have a hard time with it. A lot of my characters tend to be chaotic good because I feel that I can do what I have to do the right thing, or what my character considers is the right thing. And I feel like having that chaotic lets me, you know, maybe make decisions that are not the best, but they'll get things done. Even I'm playing a character now. This is like one of the first times I'm playing a lawful evil character, and that's even been kind of hard for me because I just don't. I don't know. I just don't think that people are all just one dimensional. I feel like people are more complex. They're like onions,
Mm.
stinky layers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
He's
I
like,
feel.
"Oh, yeah, blooming onions.
Oh,
Oh
yeah.
man,
Blooming
blooming
onion.
Steak and
onions.
lobster."
Oh, crikey. Like an onion. Yeah, I feel like alignment in 5th edition and in other games, even, like I know like Dungeon World has alignments and things like that. It kind of just feels like a holdover from older versions of D&D where that kind of thing really mattered a lot to characters, based on like class stuff, like Cody was saying, like the paladin or the monk or whatever. And like the idea of having a predestined or preset alignment for your character is kind of something that I don't really agree with. Because like Cody said, like there's a lot of things that your character might do that might go against their alignment based on like what is required at the time. Because the reason for alignments to exist is sort of to dictate what your character would go towards in terms of the choices that they make. Like a lawful good character should always go towards things that are going to help everybody and benefit the rest of the party. So in situations where the better choice is a more selfish one, they based on their alignment, they shouldn't be making that selfish choice because it goes against their alignment. And that doesn't make a lot of sense all the time, but because of their alignment, that's what they're supposed to do. And additionally, like the inclusion of alignments kind of creates biases against certain things. Like Cody was saying, he just created a lawful evil character. And there's a character that I created that I want to play a lot, and based on the concept of how alignments work, that character is neutral evil because they are very selfish and very self-centered, but not in a way where they're wanting to conquer the world or where they are just murdering everybody. So they don't really fall into lawful or chaotic evil. They're just out for themselves, which kind of sets them up as like a more neutral evil character. And I've been told by people, you can't play this as an evil character because I don't want evil characters in my game. Make them neutral. And I was like, but they're not neutral. They're lawful neutral. I'm like, no, make this character neutral because I don't want an evil character in my campaign. And it's like, what does what does the alignment of the character matter in the long run? And the overall,
Well, I think that comes down to I think that, and we even were guilty of doing this ourselves when we were just talking about how we were going to approach this conversation, this podcast about alignment. We were saying like, you know, we wanted to keep things broad stroke and not get into nitty gritty of like, you know, people doing horrible things to like change their alignment or
yeah,
whatever. And I feel like sometimes like when you say, "Oh, I'm gonna play like an evil character," like that's the first thing people think is like you're basically just gonna be like a murder hobo serial killer arsonist
yeah,
to like, and that's not necessarily like that's not at all how I would go about doing it. Like I mean there's a time and place for things. You know, if you have a character that's like a super soldier and you're gonna get into a big gunfight and blow up a bunch of stuff, like yeah, that
mhm,
makes sense. It's gonna happen. You know,
yeah,
Same thing if you're a sellsword or a mercenary. You know, you're gonna get paid to go and fight people that are not necessarily your enemies. You're gonna chop them down. You
mhm,
might think it's okay because that's how you survive, but people say, "Oh, that's evil."
yeah, exactly.
You
And
know, and
like,
I just think that it's like it's too restrictive and it's too unrealistic.
yeah, for sure.
So
I feel,
if I can step in here
yeah, for
and
sure.
add an interesting thought. So the way I always took, and especially the way that in fifth edition they talk about alignment. Um, it's guidelines. It's
Rule zero, baby.
it's very much we have to put something because we want alignments to be a factor, and alignments do play into certain other aspects of the game.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
they do influence those things, so they had to at least put something down to dictate how you tell this. And I think they do a decent, especially Dungeons and Dragons, and I know there's other alignment systems throughout other games that have dabbled with it. And yes, it is old holdover, but as long as you have some form of what you believe the morality of those alignments are, and you talk, hey, this is what my character does and this is why they have this more morality, you can still base them in an evil alignment, neutral alignment, or good alignment. And I feel like because people want to not always play the goody two shoes because it doesn't allow them to do whatever they want, a lot of people always end up playing in a neutral alignment because they can get away with doing whatever they want.
Yeah, and I also think that sometimes and not to like call people out, but I feel like sometimes it's like a lazy tactic as well to be like, my character just simply doesn't have an opinion or a stance on anything. You know, it's
Yeah.
what I call not true neutral, but too
Too
neutral.
neutral. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a bummer because it's just like, well, what's the point of you're steering this character that you've created and you're in this world and that character doesn't give a shit about anything. And it's like, well, what's the point of that?
Yeah,
And
I
at least like I'm not saying that you have to take a side on everything, but there must be something in this world that that individual you've created cares about,
yeah,
right?
and
You
it
would
gives
think.
those alignments also give you a basis on how do you if you're a big role player, alignments are a great thing. Yes, you might not fall into the cookie cutter, this is the alignment, but regardless, anytime any one of us especially creates a character, we have our own moral compass for that like we have a moral compass that's created for that character and that's how they follow it. And that's pretty much the whole basis of what alignment is. Just to have that have your moral compass for your character created so you're not just making willy-nilly things. Because otherwise you're not going to have RP. So that's the issue with too neutral. If you're
Yeah.
too neutral, you're gonna be like, oh, you're gonna run into a situation, you're gonna be like, yeah, this other family slaughtered my family, and you're gonna be like, don't really care.
Yeah.
Where if you're now somebody of a lawful background, you're going to be like, "Oh, that's wrong. They should pay like some form of repayment if it's, blood or money to offset the grievingness." Or if you're somebody who is now evil, you're going to be like, "Oh, all right, I'll go kill. I'll even the numbers if you pay me for it." Now there's all forms of RP to be had because you at least designated your alignment. And I think that's the hope of what they wish for instead of being in this you're evil, act evil. It's remember what you created your character for. And evil doesn't mean they're always going to go out slaughtering everybody. It usually means they're just in our society, for lack of going into it further, philosophically, it's you're out for yourself, you're out for your wealth, you're out for your greed. Like even in Dungeons and Dragons, they like the chaotic evil is their worst alignment, and all they say is you just controlled by greed, hatred, and personal gain.
I think the
Mhm.
reason that they do it is when you look at the real world, there's some serious like evil,
Hmm.
and in the game, a way of saying, all right, this person's bad, but you don't have to deal with a situation that may make a player very uncomfortable.
Yeah,
You just say they have an evil alignment. And then you don't have to get into it because I think it's a good mechanism to make it a little easier. So this way you don't have to hear that terrible,
atrocities
yes,
or
that
yeah,
terrible thing. So I
I
think
think it
that's where
also
it comes into effect the most.
I think it also kind of comes into play with just um, you know, it's another tool to help the storyteller progress things because that's where you get into like, well, I'm suspicious of this person. I'm going to cast a spell, to determine, oh, this person's a good person or a bad person, or I'm going to find out if this person's a fiend or
mhm,
whatever.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and so it's another mechanic, and it's also, it's a tool for progressing things because you're giving your players an option where like they might not know that they're talking to a Rakshasa,
Mhm.
that they've been dealing with one for like levels after levels, and they might not know that, you
yeah,
know. Um
Right. I mean, I'm not opposed to the idea of things having like a preset alignment. The thing that I think should be implemented into D&D and other games that use alignments is more of a fluid system of alignment based on your actions rather than you have your set alignment, and then if you do a certain thing or a couple of things, then that will change your alignment to something else. And honestly, like the system that I think gets it the best that I've played is actually the old Star Wars
yeah,
game, where you have force points and dark side points, and based on your actions, you gain points. If you do good things, you get force points, and if you get do bad things, you get dark side points, and I feel like that could be implemented into D&D, where it's like you
And
have a starting.
even you had to, like, if you wanted to progress and, like, become like a Sith Lord or something, you had to have a certain amount
Yeah.
of dark side points. So they were saying you had to be at a certain point of evil to even get to this class, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, and I feel like it's a thing that they could easily implement into Dungeons and Dragons or other games that use alignments.
So there is something that in fifth edition, um, that was kind of added in that in that same mantra. And they have a honor and dishonor point scaling system. So they use it exactly like a ability score in a
Okay.
way. And depending on what you do, you get honor for it or you get dishonor. And depending who you're talking to and what their honor and dishonor scores are, they you can, like, so if somebody's more dishonorable and you're also dishonorable, they might be more beneficial, like they might help you out more. Where if you run into somebody who's very honorable and you're very dishonorable, they're already not going to like you, and word of your stuff is going to get around.
Mhm.
So that's like very similar in that aspect. It is it is in like the back rules of how to spice up a game, because they do it with honor and sanity to try and, so you can play fifth edition similar to Call of Cthulhu, where people have sanity scores and it plays out that way. It is there, it is not used much.
Mhm.
And that's something that fifth edition has added in.
Okay.
And it's very interesting. I've been wanting to play around with the concept of it, but it is literally just a concept in the book, like, "Hey, if you wanna spice something up, use honor and dishonor." So now if, like, somebody goes through and you show mercy to somebody you just beat, like, maybe you're in a big war setting and you captured a noble, instead of just, beheading them, which would have been seen as dishonorable in whatever culture, like, whatever play style you're playing in, you release them, and or you keep them prisoner, but you treat them well, so you're honorable. So you get points for that and you play it out from there. It's very interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking about, because in that way it also, if you are playing a game where characters have certain alignments and things like that,
Mhm.
and they take certain actions that sort of go against their alignments, but not real, like go against what they believe their alignment is. It could sort of show them, like, it could change their alignment basically. Like, oh, you're playing a chaotic neutral who just runs around murdering and stealing and doing all this terrible stuff.
Yeah.
That's more chaotic evil than chaotic neutral. And or you're playing, I heard a story about, like, a law, like, I've heard a lot of stories about lawful good paladins who do terrible things to NPCs. Like, they, like,
Yeah.
enslave them and do all this crazy stuff for, like, minor crimes because they need to be shown justice. And it's like, that's a super evil thing to be doing.
Yeah.
So I feel like, that system could help, change a character's alignment over time to be like, no, you're actually playing an evil character. You're doing bad things. But it's like, no, but I'm a paladin. I'm lawful good. It's like, just because you're a paladin doesn't mean that you're a good person.
Well,
Right.
that's the thing. Is like just because your character thinks that you're out saving people or whatever,
Yeah.
you're actually going around like as a murderous villain.
Yeah.
So that's where it's like, as the DM, you're kind of, like, that's one of the things I do like about, like, in the Call of Cthulhu, is that if the character gets to a certain point of insanity, they lose control of their character. The character
Hmm.
becomes an NPC at the keeper's disposal,
Yep.
and that's also something that I believe that was something that they did in the old Star Wars. I thought there was something that was like, if you had a certain amount of dark side points, but you didn't have like enough like classes or something, like if you weren't like in a specific class, like it would drive you mad.
Hmm.
I think I remember that.
It's possible.
Or I could be confusing a different game. We
That
played a
sounds like.
lot of them.
I mean, considering that game is just a reskin of 3.5, that is probably a possibility that that was what it was. Because
Yeah.
3.5 loves to punish people for not doing stuff the right way.
Suffer.
But yeah, I feel like it would be an interesting way to be like, well, if you are playing a certain alignment and you're going against that alignment with your actions, maybe it'll teach you to, start playing your alignment better, or just give in and say, you know what, maybe I am chaotic evil, or maybe I am,
Maybe I am the bad guy.
Well,
maybe I, yeah,
well,
so
to counter that, I have to say there are older laws or older codes that people used where it would be an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. So
yeah,
that also has to be played into how the character is being played. If they're going out
mhm.
just murdering people, well, then they're not good whatsoever because that's not a
Yeah,
good
they're not
attitude.
Well,
even
that
neutral
If
at
was
that point.
they're
that.
just going after people who kill or steal or do something and then they're returning that, where does that lie?
Yeah, so that was something that we had kind of talked, I think, about in our Paladin episode.
Hmm.
Because the one Paladin I played was like it was a homebrew class, but it was based off of the Norse mythology and like the Norse religion, Asatru. And so the Paladin had he was quite martial. He didn't care if he had to go in and like crack some skulls to get something done. If you were an enemy and you came at him with a weapon, he would probably dispatch you.
Yeah,
Because that's part of his culture. It's like I'm not going to leave this wounded person behind me because he's just going to stab me in the back.
right.
You know, and one of the examples that we had was that we encountered these thieves and they had stolen from us and we like took like a finger or whatever because they stole something small. We encountered them again like two towns later and they were stealing again. And then this time I chopped off the one guy's hand. And Steve was the DM at the time and Steve was like, that's like your alignment's gonna change, you're gonna lose your powers or whatever. And I argued, I was like, no, I was like in the culture, it's like, no, this is a thief.
Hmm.
He broke the law, he gets punished for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And that was like that's like a cultural thing. And if you're gonna get into this is what we were kind of talking about, like avoiding as a whole for the discussion, but it's a point. It's like all societal norms and laws and customs, things like that, just come from enough people agreeing to them.
Yep.
hmm,
So if enough people agree that doing something bad is the right thing, they're going to paint it as a beautiful picture, even though it's the wrong thing.
Well, and I think that's where, again, your session zero, you talk about hey, this is what I picture alignments being like, and this is what the culture is in here. And you got to talk it out, I think, with all your players, from the DM to your fellow, character players, um, and just try and figure out, like, all right, if this is how I picture my character, what do we think for this style of campaign their alignment would be? You know,
yeah,
I think that's one of the best ways to do it.
And I think it's certainly I think it's a great point you bring up about the session zero because if you get like if you get a bunch of guys that show up to your table and they're like, oh well, I'm lawful good goody two shoes paladin, and the only other player at the table is like, well, I'm lawful evil warlock, like fiendish warlock or whatever.
right.
Like
Hmm.
automatically, you're gonna have trouble. Like you're gonna have problems at your table. So it's a good idea to like kind of hash those things out beforehand. Um, but one thing that Steven was talking about was, he was saying like maybe like the tiniest infraction like shouldn't really like destroy your alignment and throw your alignment out of whack, and
Yeah,
and I agree with that. And the wizard, she's a hobgoblin wizard. It's for the Curse of Strahd game. Her name is Graz, which is a shortened version of her goblin name.
Hmm.
And she was exiled from her horde because she was studying magic that was outside of their belief system. So they publicly like burned her, they like scarred her, and they exiled her. And so she's kind of on a revenge story, and she's a lawful evil character. But I don't play her in the sense of like She doesn't parade around like Darth Vader or the Emperor, but
Mhm.
does she use people? Absolutely. Does she sometimes put her allies in bad situations to get what she wants? Yes. Does she respect power even if it's from bad people? Yeah. Like that's playing up to the lawful evil things. But then
Yep.
at the same time, like there's been aspects where, or there's been times where she's intervened and helped her party because they're her party, they're her friends, even though that's kind of counter to her alignment and her belief system,
Yeah.
you know?
Well,
So
it's
you
and we've
don't,
we've
I-
also justified that with, well, if my party dies, I'm also gonna die. So it's self-preservation.
it is, but it's also like, I think of it as like, like one of the best examples of it is Gimli and Legolas. Gimli and Legolas, when they first interact, like they're basically, we're going to throw every insult at one another that we can think of from our thousands of years of being at each other's throats. And we're just going to say, oh, yeah, never trust an elf, or oh, greedy as a dwarf. Like they're just going to have this back and forth. But eventually, it wasn't just because they were with the same mission in mind, it was because they respected each other and they were friends. They became friends. So I feel like that's like a good example for like, just because like your creature is a or your character is like a hobgoblin, it's like, oh well, hobgoblins are all lawful evil. They don't have to be.
Well, it's
Like
also
I don't
something
feel
that's
like you
lawful
should.
evil can also still have friends.
Right, but I just don't
That's a
think
good
that
point.
you have to be beholden to like, you know what I mean? Like you
Yeah.
can just make
Yeah.
like I know at some point Graz is probably going to betray her party because there's going to become a
Oh
time
yeah.
where there's going to be an offer that's too good for her and she's going to take it. And that's playing up to her whole thing. And everybody at the table knows it. They know it's going to happen.
Mhm.
They're just waiting for the right, for the right event to come through.
Now, to contradict that a little bit, I wonder sometimes, like, if a character has evil intentions, right? Let's say, let's take your character for instance. What if the thing that makes her evil is what she's going to do when she gets the power to take care of the tribe? Like she's going to wipe everybody out that hurt her. Does that? I don't feel that necessarily means that she has to be evil all the time, or even to the point where she's willing to betray her party to a degree. You know?
Well, the party has kind of an odd dynamic.
Oh, super up.
Um, the party barbarian and Graz do not get along. Like they have like a total love hate thing going on, which is mostly hate.
Yeah.
But I depend on that barbarian because that barbarian is just a huge damage sponge. So just let him get out there and rage and hit things with his axe and back him up. But then there's a druid, and the druid and Graz are a little bit more friendly. But I don't think that like I know that she's going to betray at least the barbarian.
Yeah.
I don't know if she'll betray Gil the druid.
Well, I think so. Like that's where you have the conversation. Like, yes, your Graz is evil, right? In this circumstance, yes, Graz is evil, and if somebody offered power, she'd probably take the power. But it doesn't mean she wouldn't try and save somebody from being in her path of destruction.
Sure, yeah,
Right.
and I feel like she's very consumed with revenge. That's what she wants, is revenge, and so she's swallowing a lot of crap to get revenge.
Yes.
So even though she wants to be this lawful evil, like, you know, empress, like queen, she's not at that level yet. She's not strong enough yet. She doesn't have enough skill. She doesn't know enough spells. And so she's got to kind of put up with people and work with what she has to get to where she wants to be, you
Mhm.
know?
And there's
So if it's like, yeah, like I'll deal with the barbarian insulting me every night, and then eventually I'll drop a fireball on him that he won't recover from. You know,
Yeah.
like
Well, that actually segues into something I wanted to talk about is there's in some circles there's a notion that the evil character is going to, you have a bunch of characters that are fighting in a melee and then they're just going to be launching the fireball into the group of people, and that's not necessarily what like a normal evil character would do. That's what a stupid evil character would do.
Yes,
Yeah.
Now if it's that opportunity where, you know
you
that
get the kill.
barbarian's gone down a couple of times and it's like, well, now is the time. Like they've used a bunch of resources, they're weak, they really need they're asking me to help them because they're that weak. Like now would be a good time to launch that fireball and wipe them out. But it's all about a waiting game. And that
Yeah.
would constitute an evil character. Whereas the other option of, oh well, doesn't matter who's in the way, I'm just going to do it. That's a good way to get your character knifed. If you're just
Mhm.
lobbing them into the melee all the time and not considering the other characters in there, not assisting them. And I think you
Yeah.
can have a good character and an evil character in the same party. And it needs to be explored and talked about beforehand. So this way, they may even potentially work well together because they're similar in a lot of ways or very different in a lot of ways. And that can create a cool group dynamic. They don't necessarily have to love each other at the end of the day, but could
Yeah.
definitely help out, especially if you have like some type of paladin or something like that, and something else that is a little more on the dark side and could even potentially you know enslave corpses to do their bidding, or worse, even somebody who tortures or maims
Mhm.
people and lets them live with that.
Yeah.
So
And in
there's
that situation, like, alignment really shouldn't be the strongest thing that, you know, the party is about, because you shouldn't, like, 'cause it's like you have like your lawful good and your chaotic evil characters or whatever together in the party. One's willing to do things that the other isn't willing to do. Alignment, like, if they get along and they're willing to let the one person do the thing that they're not willing to do, like, the alignment thing shouldn't be an issue between the two of them. And that's the whole thing of like, well, then why, like, that's the whole problem I have with alignment sort of being a holdover, is like, well, if one character is willing to do something that the other isn't, just because their alignment's opposed doesn't mean that they should be at each other's throats all the time just because one is good and the other is evil. Because
Mhm.
it's like, if they get the job done, you know, but it's like, oh, they did it this way, and because of my alignment I disagree with that purely based on my alignment. I think that that's kind of
So
stupid.
That's yeah.
so in the one game that Cody is DMing that I'm a part of, and you're a part of it, Steve.
Mhm.
I'm playing my paladin, and
not you,
we
Frank.
have we have a
Frank, sit down. Don't even comment.
They talk about this game every podcast.
roughly. I think there's a couple that we haven't talked about it, but
No,
so
there
my
aren't.
paladin and our rogue are are very different, but because of the aspects that my paladin is, like, he's a vengeance paladin. He kind of has that John Locke philosophy of, the ends justify the means. Um so he'll try and do things a proper way, but if it has to go get dirty, he lets somebody else do that.
Mhm.
And blames ignorance. He doesn't, for the most part, go to that person and say, "Hey, do this," because that would make him evil. He just doesn't say not to do it,
Right.
and walks away and washes the hand of the situation. Because he knows, well, down some path this possibly can happen, and if I don't stay in the way, it has a higher percentage of happening, so I'm not going to stand in the way.
Mm.
And is that an evil? Is that a good thing? You could argue it, but my character is not partaking in either, torturing somebody who is of good nature. They just don't want to tell you what's going on. But either way, he's gonna get his answers and he's gonna get to the end and the greater evil is gonna be taken out.
Yeah. I do
Mhm.
a weird thing with one of my characters who's neutral evil where I don't always kill the opponent I'm fighting. And I
Yeah,
feel too many people in role playing games just outright go for the kill nonstop.
yeah.
And I even feel like if I played a paladin, I would do that a lot. Where it would
Mhm.
be, I need to try and give him a second chance. Depending on which type of paladin, but especially in like older versions, that would be the thing I would try to do is,
Yep.
knock
Well,
them
that was just like when
unconscious,
we used to.
capture them, and, you know, talk to them, see what I can do.
It was just like when
Yeah.
we used to play Star Wars, the D20 Star Wars, and you'd have somebody who was a Jedi, you know, like Sean. I remember multiple times was trying to get people to, put down their weapon or surrender. I think one of the times he actually ended up getting a bunch of dark side points was one such situation.
Yeah. Well,
And
he used
like
to
he had
cut the
like
arms off with the weapon in it, so he would do a whole bunch of damage to the arm, cut it off, and then one time he did it again
right, and
to the
that's
same person. I was like, "What are you
the
doing?"
first the first invitation is like completely on spot on with like the whole Jedi, like the whole like lightsaber combat thing. Like that's like a dedicated move they're trying to get to stop a fight from taking place.
A
Mhm.
deadly confrontation.
Yeah, to be like, I'm going to remove this person's arm so that they can no longer attack me. So like when Obi-Wan takes Anakin's arm and both legs, like that's an actual named maneuver for his style of lightsaber combat.
Yeah.
And he did that in one swoop. He didn't, take off one arm, then take off the other arm, and then
Yeah,
take
because
off the
that would
leg.
be yeah, because that would be deemed cruel.
Yeah.
Right.
Where if you're doing it in one fell swoop and that's what happens, that's what happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So I feel that more players, it adds to the game when you're knocking out the opponents, even if it's like, say you're fighting goblins or hobgoblins or something, and you're in their territory, do you actually get the right to just murder them?
yeah.
You broke into their camp, you're chopping through their people. Like, yeah, they're going to be mad at you.
Yeah.
You're in their house. Like,
Yeah.
and to a degree, I feel too many people are just like, oh, but the XP, well, you don't get XP for murdering. Like, I honestly don't feel that's where the XP would come from. Yeah, you defeated the opponent, but you don't have to kill them. And you can
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
outright
one
say,
time, one time Steve did this great thing. It was that same campaign with my like Norse paladin. Was he did this great thing where we had encountered kobolds and we had like fought them off and we killed several of them. And my paladin used to keep trophies from his enemies that he defeated, and he would make some sort of like ornament or decoration for himself. Um, so in this case, it was like a kobold jaw or something, like kobold teeth or something. Well, from that point on, the kobolds like they avoided us. They didn't want anything to do with us because we had attacked them, or they had attacked us. They failed, and they've lost a good number of their people. Well, then, like immediately after we got involved in these conflicts where we wiped out like this like huge army of gnolls, we like stopped like this whole like gnoll like onslaught from taking place and saved this village, which like directly benefited the kobolds. So then the kobolds were cool with us, and they would like come up and tell us stuff when we were like out in the plains, like out in the wild, like a random kobold would pop up and be like, "Oh yeah, like there's giants ahead," and give us like a little like heads up.
Hmm.
And it was just kind of cool that it had come from that had come from saving one character or just from like your interactions, and also having them change so that they're not just set in their ways. Like kobolds are always bad.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah.
now if you're taking out the things that are fighting them, you're helping them, and they're gonna be like, all right, we'll let you keep going.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So right there, it's like they're not as cut and dry. Like the alignment system, I think wants you to maybe be a little too cut and dry,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
I think it's of less importance than maybe a lot of people think it is. Like, just let your character become who your character like is gonna become
And I
because
think
right.
of this story or because of
yeah, and
what's happening.
I would almost say like that's starting to be the push in a lot of tabletop RPGs. Is yeah, they ask for your start alignment, and they'll still from all the holdover of these type of classes would have you'd find primarily in these alignments. But I mean, looking at what they did with the paladin class, let alone um they are much more violent in their arch classes than they ever used to be. And they allow
Yeah,
for a lot more justification in those classes for doing crueler things and still be able to have your powers.
Mhm.
yeah. They
So
cool down alignments work for classes in fifth edition, and I feel like that's a really good move in the right direction as far as alignment goes. And
mm,
like the fact that there are like the fact that it is so cut and dry makes sense for certain things. Like stuff out of hell is going to be evil.
yeah,
Stuff like
devil has to
angels
be
are
a
going to be
devil.
good because
Yeah, exactly.
but at the same time, then they're like, oh, but like orcs and goblins are always evil, like they're always chaotic evil or whatever. And it's like, well, why do they have to be chaotic evil? Like you can't have a good orc, and it's like, well, you can, but that just goes against their whole natural whatever. And it's like, well, that sucks because what if I want to have good orcs? What if I want to have a whole race of good orcs? And it's like I can make a race of good orcs, but the book says no,
Mm. Yeah,
no, the
That's
official
where
stuff
you
says no,
say
they
fuck
have
the
to be
book.
evil because that's what orcs are. And it's like that.
That's what you say
Yeah,
fuck
and
the book, fuck
exactly.
the rules. I'm
and
gonna
like
do what is fun for me and my friends.
like to a point, like
Yeah, exactly.
them creating the worlds, like you're gonna have if the age old concept is if you're gonna have something that is evil in nature creating something, you believe it'll also be evil in nature. And that's kind of
Yeah.
especially like Dungeons and Dragons has always done that concept, and that's why even even in like Lord of the Rings, the things that created in Middle Earth that created the Orcai and the orcs, like what created them was evil in nature, so then they are going to then be evil themselves.
Right.
And kind of you have this concept that certain other races were created more with free will in mind, so that's why you guys can choose what you want.
Mm.
But it also doesn't speak like sometimes you have, and you see it through all of mythology and all of these tabletop games, you have they explain a race that's created, and then they explain that there was a huge revolution and now there's two sides of the races, and some are in the more traditional
Hmm.
sense and others are now more your free will sense. So it's difficult, and I think it's just very much as we always say, they're all guidelines. It's all this is kind of what we have an idea for, but anything can change.
Mm. I think if
Right.
you're
I feel like there should. Go ahead, Frank.
no, go ahead.
Go ahead, Neil.
I
Neil,
was just gonna
Neil,
say.
you can go now,
All
please.
right.
Neil, say something quick.
Steven, go. I want you to say something.
Frank, it's back to you.
Okay, I was just gonna. But I feel like if a creature is of a
Steve,
certain level of
Steve,
sentience, then they
Hmm.
shouldn't be like set in one alignment. Like they should have the free will to be whatever alignment they feel is right for that. Like they can have like a guideline of like, yes, this race tends towards evil, possibly, but like it should always be kind of a, but they can be whatever alignment that fits the narrative that you want to create, sort of
Yeah,
thing.
I mean
I feel like that should be.
I just think it's like, it poops on the whole nature nurture, you know,
no, no,
psychology
we're just getting
development.
into more and
Yeah.
more psychology the more and more we continue on
Well,
with
I
these
know, but
alignments.
just because, that's just like saying like it's like the argument for like, oh, like all pit bulls are aggressive animals. And
Mm,
well, just because some of them were bred to be aggressive or they were kept in environments that forced them to be aggressive does not mean that every single pit bull is an aggressive, just as soon as you see it's going to bite you.
yeah,
Like
Mhm.
that's kind of what I don't like about it with like the orcs and everything. I get with more like the lizard folk, like they say, like the lizard folk just kind of has like a lizard brain, where like they don't
Mhm.
necessarily pick up on like emotions and things like that. Like just because
Yeah.
like they're wired differently. It's like some of the Star Wars races that were like bug like. They didn't pick up on emotion or jokes or things like that because it wasn't a
Mhm.
part of their species.
Right, but that doesn't necessarily make them bad.
No,
You
and
know,
that's what I'm
just makes
trying
them
to
different.
that's what I'm trying to get at is like I just feel that just because like elves are good doesn't mean like there wasn't a bad elf like in
yeah,
and that doesn't mean that like it's like what Dritz is like he's like the classic he was a drow ranger but he was supposed to be evil but he becomes this big hero because he leaves the Underdark.
hmm
Yeah.
And he goes against all of his cultural and societal norms
yeah,
because what they tell him is right is not what he thinks is right.
Right.
yeah,
But that makes an interesting character, and that's kind of what like that's what I feel like you should do with alignment is just like keep it interesting and just keep it relevant to your story,
yep,
Mhm.
and just because the book says something like the book is talking about orcs and religions of the orcs and creations and things like that based off of their specific content like like D&D like I
Yeah.
feel like everything like D&D always harkens back to what Forgotten Realms or Faerun or whatever
yeah,
you know
yeah. And that's all it's
so
gonna be, and that's anybody's content, Like even
Yeah.
the stuff we're gonna put out, we're gonna speak about the general idea of, this race, this like this deity, this group. And it's always gonna be the general aspect of it, but you're always gonna have um, you know, things that don't go with the norm.
yeah I
It
mean
doesn't mean it shouldn't exist. It
no
should.
right
That's how it is.
right right
So, and
Yeah.
I think it's just hard to paint a picture without, like, you're just trying to do a basic landscape, and if you do that, you miss a lot of other things that everybody doesn't like, you're always gonna have people who are like, "Oh, that's good and that's evil and that's how it is." And you're like, "No, that's not it." And it's always gonna be a fight, and until somebody comes up with a better system plan, like, it works. It gets the job done.
yeah I think that if you keep it fluid
Mhm.
that you will have a better time that you'll tell better
Yeah.
stories
Yes.
um and
Yeah.
like if I could give like just like a couple examples, like one of the big ones would be like Jamie Lannister from the Game of Thrones books, not the TV show, but the books. Because you see Jamie Lannister through like six or seven different characters' eyes before you ever get a Jamie Lannister chapter, and you just have this notion that he's an asshole. And then once you start getting inside of his head, and you're like, well, he's not so cut and dry. He's not what I thought. He's not the sugar cookie cutout. He's something else.
Yep.
And you got to
Mhm.
see this character evolve like to the point where like he's at his highest point, then he's at his lowest point. He's humiliated, defeated, captured, all this stuff. And like he just has this huge character progression where he ends up changing alignments
Yeah.
and and becoming a character that actually people wanted to give a shit about. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's something that you could do totally in a game where you could have somebody like it's like the classic like it's the Han Solo when
Yeah.
the rebels are like, "Come on, Han, you got to help us," and he's like, "No, I'm not. I'm not helping you. This one's your fight. It's not me." But guess who shows up at the end?
Yeah.
Fucking Han comes back.
Chewbacca. Oh,
Chewbacca.
Well, of course, Chewie.
Yeah, I guess at the I think we've pretty much covered everything we can with these alignments, and at the end of the day, there's never gonna be anything perfect. But
Yeah,
if you're trying to be that rules lawyer, if you're trying to really just like hammer in, oh, this is how it should be, this is how the book is. Like, are you having a good time? Is everybody at the table having a good time?
Yeah, like why are you here to do
Like,
that?
there might be times and places where you need that, and that's good, and you've established that hopefully in your session zero. But you know, you can't lock down somebody's alignment right off the bat. Things happen, things change. So why, if the current world is going to change, why can't your character's alignment also change? Food for thought, I
yeah,
think.
I think when it comes to alignment, it sounds good and all, but I'm just pretty neutral about it.
Yeah,
Wow.
like,
I
and
just
and I think right there is just
Well, I just think that like it's I feel like it's restrictive when you paint a character, you say like this is it. They're just this alignment. That's all they're gonna be for their whole progression. Like
yep,
I'm just sticking to this thought pattern and this way of existence, and that's it. Like I just feel like it's denying you the real like rich part of the story,
Mhm.
whereas like if your character is going out and like going on all these adventures and these quests, like
mhm,
that has to be affecting them in some way. It has to be changing them in some way. It's not just leveling up and getting new abilities and new
yeah,
armor and treasure all the time. Like they have to be developing as people too,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, I always
mhm,
say,
yeah,
like I'm looking at your alignment. It's just to get your base character down. It's the same thing as the background. Like there's a reason why a lot of
yeah,
books, anytime you're creating a character, alignment's in character development. It's not as a class or as a race. It's because it's just your first felt thoughts and where your background comes from and what type of person it is. That character is gonna develop and it's gonna change three ways to Sunday. You know,
yeah.
before everything's said and done, and let it happen. Don't let it hinder it. Yeah,
Just
certain
let
things.
this happen. Just let it
Yeah,
happen.
like
Nice tender moment between your
yeah,
rogue and your paladin.
yeah. Just let it
Just
happen,
just let
and
it
then they can
happen.
get back at each other's throats another day.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anybody else got any
And I
more
mean, and
thoughts
I mean,
on
that's
that?
all
And
why I
go ahead.
keep saying that. Yeah, I like a character's alignment. You can have a base alignment at the start, but their alignment overall should be based on their actions and not
Yep.
just on that initial creation. You know, and it would be great if there was like a mechanical way. And like Neil said, there is the India mechanical way to do it, but like if there was in the game to actually do that, that would be
Yeah.
one thing that I would want them to change in the game overall because I feel like it would help, show players you're not playing your character to the like if alignment is important to your character, you're not playing based on your initial alignment. You're playing this completely different thing because the things that you're doing, are good or bad or whatever, and you need to realize that your character is doing these things that you say, oh, it's just because it's how my character would be because of their alignment, and it's like, no, it isn't. You're doing bad stuff or you're doing good stuff. Even though your character is good, like you say, your character is neutral. No, they're doing a lot of evil things or they're doing a lot of good things. Your character is good or evil based on their actions, not just because you wrote down that they're neutral on your sheet.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it's all about the ends, the means to the ends kind of deal. Like if you're doing something, if you're doing a bunch of really really nice things, because in the end you're trying to gain trust so that you can betray or use characters for your own gain. That's not You're not doing good things for the sake of being good. You're doing good things for a selfish reason, which could be construed as an evil thing. So
Well, it's
that's like
like a
you're doing a bunch
person.
of good stuff,
Well,
but
that's that whole trope, isn't it? Is that
Yeah, a
the
person who
person who does evil things while attempting to do good things. That's like the whole the axiom of the road to hell is paved in good intentions.
yeah.
Like
yeah,
that's just typical. I mean, that's flat out. Neil and I were talking about this the other day. Is Gandalf with the ring? He's like,
Mhm.
don't give me the ring because I would try to do good things with it, and I would end up doing awful things.
Yep.
So I
hmm
think it's you are capable of having those type of characters where it's like, yeah, like I claim to be good or I'm doing something for a just cause, but my actions are deplorable.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like look at like an
Or I'm just flat
inquisition.
out,
You know,
or I'm just flat out lying about my intentions, to
sure,
gain your trust.
yeah,
Well, I think we've covered a lot of great stuff here.
yeah.
I'm sure we could
Yeah,
talk philosophy for another whole hour, if not
And get nowhere.
months, and just get nowhere, like
yeah.
philosophy tends to do sometimes.
100%.
Um, but yeah, I mean, let us know what you guys think about alignment. Do you like it? Do you end up just using it to depict what your character is right off the bat, and then it doesn't mean anything else besides written words on your sheet? Um, Other than that, hopefully everybody enjoyed this episode from Tabletop Totality, and we'll see you next time.
Wow, man, that podcast was pretty chaotic.
Well, I think we're done here.